Defensemen are always a hot topic in fantasy, and we saw just last season in all of the competitive leagues that we drafted in how early defensemen were actually going. Now, it's really important to pinpoint those good value defensemen, and today's video, I'm going to be breaking down my top 25 defensemen going into the season, tiering them from tier S all the way down to tier D. It's going to be a good video, guys, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Okay, let's jump right into the video. We have our top 25 defensemen here below. And to get us started, no surprise, we have Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche. Scored 30 goals and 92 points last season while adding 246 shots and 38 power play points. Now, throughout his career, he's averaged 38 power play points per game, and that just speaks to the volume and the offensive numbers that Cale Makar has managed to put up through the course of his career. Since he came into the league, he's been arguably the best defenseman of all time. So there's a lot to love here for a guy that's likely going to be going in the first round, and I think it's an extremely first-round pick as Makar's ceiling is sky high going into this season. Now, the second defenseman on this list in the S tier is going to be Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I understand there's a lot of question marks with the Canucks this season. They lost JT Miller, who was a very, very strong power play point getter. And with the regression we saw last season from Elias Pettersson, I get there are some worries and a little bit of caution, especially with him dealing with injury last season and playing in just 67 games. But he was on pace for 92 points last season, which is an extremely high number for any defenseman. He's managed to uptick his goal scoring as well as his shot volume over the last couple of seasons. We know he doesn't contribute at an elite level like some other defensemen in terms of blocks and hits. And typically when you draft defensemen, that's what you're drafting them for, is just that all that category coverage on top of some of the points. But with these two defensemen in Makar and Quinn Hughes, those are guys you draft because they're basically forwards. They should be within the top 10 to 15 points in the entire league, including forwards. So there's a lot to love from Quinn Hughes going into the season. Now, the third defenseman in the S tier is going to be Zach Werenski. Now, I'm a little hesitant, and I probably won't be drafting Werenski this season. Just for me, there are a little bit of injury concerns. So last season was the first time since 2018 that he's played more than 70 games. So there's a little bit of concern there for me in terms of health. But he did play the full 82 games last season, had 82 points, 298 shots, which is a number I don't know if we've seen from a defenseman in a very long time. Maybe Makar has done it in the past. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but extremely strong offensive numbers on a team that was borderline a bubble playoff team. I expect them to be even if not a little bit better going into next season. But for Werenski here, there is a little bit of injury concern, but I do think we can't undermine a 23 goal, 300 shot, 82 point season from any defenseman. He's a workhorse, 27 minutes per night. No one else to take a spot up front or on the back end for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So Zach Werenski falls in the S tier, but he could be a borderline A tier. I would proceed with caution when looking to draft him this season. Now moving on, we have the last defenseman in the S tier is Rasmus Dahlin. Now, he could have been the first defenseman in the A tier, but I just think the production from Dahlin is too stable year over year. And now we did see a dip in his peripherals last season, but he should be a lock going into this year for 200 shots, 100 plus hits, and 100 plus blocks. He put up 68 points in 73 games last season on a Buffalo Sabres team that just seems to never want to make the playoffs. But still, the offensive numbers are there. The peripheral numbers are very, very strong. We know how good Rasmus Dahlin is each and every season. But for some reason, maybe because he's a Sabre, he seems to just always fall in drafts, meaning you can probably get him in the third round this season. I know early ADP is very, very touchy, but he's looking around 39 right now in the initial rankings. So a lot to love there from Dahlin, and I have him as my last S tier defenseman. So moving on to the A tier, we have Mackenzie Weegar of the Calgary Flames. Now, Weegar isn't as flashy as the first four defensemen on this list, and maybe, yes, I do have him as my number 5, and I'll get into the Roman Josi conundrum right after this. But with Weegar, he is arguably one of the strongest peripheral getting defensemen in the entire league, meaning even if he doesn't put up a bunch of points for you, and goals, assists, power play points, he's still going to be producing 150 plus shots, 200 plus blocks, 200 plus hits. The only other defenseman that is similar to him is Mort Seider, who has phenomenal peripheral coverage. If you're in a category league, if you're in a points league, the floor is as safe as it gets with Mackenzie Weegar. For some reason, he seems to always go underdrafted, just like Dahlin. Maybe it's because he's not flashy, doesn't put up a ton of points, but he did score 20 goals 2 seasons ago. So with Weegar here, I don't know if he has power play one solidified. I know Zane Parekh is coming in this season, potentially making the team. I know Chris is a little bit high on Parekh, thinking that he may take over power play one. But Weegar did have a strong power play point season, putting up 20 plus power play points last season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But regardless, you still get that extremely safe floor with Weegar. Now, I'm going to put Roman Josi on this list. I initially had him as an honorable mention because he is dealing with a head injury right now, and there is some uncertainty of him starting the season, which is unfortunate for me because in 3 of my 5 keeper leagues, I actually do have Roman Josi. So a little bit of concern from a personal standpoint, but I'm really hoping Josi can be healthy this season. If healthy, he's definitely in the S tier, but if he does miss, let's say 15 games this season, he'll be an S tier defenseman for 67 games. But just because we may not see him for an entire 82 games this year, there is a little bit of a concern, but we know the impact Josi has. Very good point getting defenseman. He's a workhorse, plays a ton of minutes, and is very good peripheral wise. So he's kind of an honorable mention, but I'm going to keep him on here just for now. So moving on to the next defenseman, we have Josh Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets. This power play turned it around going into last season. If you remember in the preseason last year, and if Beta Human, if you're watching this, you're a Jets fan, so you know I'm familiar with them from the Discord and from the YouTube comments. Last season, the Jets didn't have a fully healthy power play for the entire season. Sorry, 2 years ago. So last year, they were healthy for majority of the season, and we saw the impact that this power play one had. And Morrissey is the clear-cut number 1 guy there. Neil Pionk is the number 2 guy, but still a lot to love from Josh Morrissey, who should be playing a ton of minutes this season. Now, his point totals have regressed a little bit over the last 3 seasons. He had 76 points and in 2022 and was down to 62 just last season. But he should be a lock for 60 plus points, 25 plus power play points, very good block numbers, decent hit numbers, and a ton of minutes. Very safe defenseman. If you want to draft him as your defenseman 1, if these guys go a little bit earlier, that's completely fine with me. So a lot to like here from Josh Morrissey going into this season. Now, the next defenseman I have is Evan Bouchard of the Edmonton Oilers. And I just want to say with Bouchard, he may in fact be the best and worst defenseman in the NHL, because if you watch his on ice play, he's so good in the offensive zone, but in the defensive zone, just a complete nightmare. I don't think he's a candidate to make Team Canada this year. Maybe leave a comment below if you think he might be, but he's a power play force. We know how good this Edmonton power play is. I really don't have to justify it. But with Bouchard, he does add a very elite shot total. He also has 149 points over his last 163 games, including 61 power play points over the last 2 seasons. So strong shot totals, very good power play production. I don't think it's possible he could lose his power play one. There is potential. I know there was times he was taken off of it last year, but we see through their deep playoff runs, he's the guy they go to each and every time on the top power play unit. So I do have Bouchard here in the A tier. Now, next defenseman in the A tier is going to be Moritz Seider of the Detroit Red Wings. So with no power play one defenseman in sight, I don't think Axel Sandin Pellikka of the Detroit Red Wings, a very promising young prospect. I don't know if he'll make the team this season. If he does, I would say it does impact Seider a little bit in terms of the power play production, but you're not drafting Seider for power play points. You're drafting Seider because, similar to Weegar, as I mentioned, he's just a very, very elite peripheral defenseman. He hits every single category at a strong level. His minutes actually rose a little bit last season, but over the last 3 years, the craziest thing about Moritz Seider, so since the start of his career, he's played 4 seasons. He has never missed a game in the NHL. It was kind of wild for me to actually look at, but Seider has never missed a game in the NHL. So you're getting a guy that is more than likely to play 82 games this season, put up massive peripherals for you. He's a very, very safe defenseman to draft. And for me, he skated 25 minutes per night last season. I can't see this changing. There's really no competition on the back end. I don't think they view Edvinsson as an elite offensive defenseman. He would be really the only competition. We saw the Gustafsson experiment fail last year when he was potentially going to be PP1, and they ended up moving Seider back up there. So a lot to like from Moritz Seider going into this season. Now, the last A-tier defenseman for me is Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, I was a little bit bearish on Hedman a couple of years ago, but he definitely proved me wrong. He continues to be the smooth skating Swedish defenseman that mans the top power play on Tampa Bay, who has arguably one of the strongest power plays in the entire NHL. So a lot to love from Victor Hedman here going into this season. The peripherals are nowhere near the Sider and Uyghur-esque, but he still has pretty strong shot production, very good power play point and point upside. He's a workhorse defenseman, should be playing 23 plus minutes per night in all offensive situations. Now, beginning the A tier, we have one of my boys, arguably one of my favorite defensemen in the entire league. I've been hyping up Sanderson for what feels like a couple years now. I owned him in almost all my leagues last season. I think he's a borderline A tier defenseman. He had his very, very good breakout season last year, 57 points, 30 points on the power play, played nearly 25 minutes per night, added 195 shots, 163 blocks. And in his fourth NHL season, turning 23 this year, the sky is the limit for Sanderson. We may actually see him as a potential A-tier defenseman going into after the end of this season. Again, the only blockade for him is Shabbat, but I think we all know by now what I'm going to say here with Shabbat is he's just always due for some sort of injury. He can miss a week, he can miss 4 weeks. It's just always inevitable with Thomas Chabot. So a lot of love here from Jake Sanderson. Moving on to the next B-tier defenseman, we have arguably my favorite defenseman going into the season in terms of value, and it's Seth Jones of the Florida Panthers. So it's kind of a weird case with Jones because he went from arguably the worst team in the NHL in the Chicago Blackhawks. I think they finished last. So the worst team in the NHL to the best team in the NHL, the Stanley Cup champions and the Florida Panthers. And people kind of thought, man, maybe Seth Jones actually is pretty good. Well, that's what happens when you put a defenseman on the Chicago Blackhawks and just, I mean, he signed there. It was up to him. But I'm just saying for fantasy purposes, when you draft a defenseman on a team like Chicago who doesn't have a good power play, they don't score a lot of goals, they spend a lot of their time in the defensive zone. Seth Jones moves into a spot on the Florida Panthers that turns players into gold. We saw what they did with Montour, Rodriguez, Bennett, Reinhart. I can just name pretty much every player. This team is very well structured for offensive numbers. They always have their fourth defenseman pushing up in plays. They like smooth skating guys. Jones isn't there to be the shutdown guy. He's there to be the power play one quarterback. We saw it all throughout playoffs. Now, with the injury to Matt Tkachuk, it probably does slightly hurt his point totals, just because Tkachuk is a very, very elite power play guy. But with Jones here, I think he can be in line for a massive season. We know how many minutes he plays. Every year he's top 5 for minutes. And I bet if I were to go look at the numbers over the last 3 seasons, he probably has some of the highest overall time on ice or average time on ice. So he should be playing 24, 25 plus minutes per night on the Panthers team that will probably finish as a top 3 offensive team in the league. And I think Jones will be extremely undervalued in drafts this year. So he's probably my highest conviction defenseman going into this season. Now, moving on, we have the young phenom of the Montreal Canadiens, one of the most exciting teams in the NHL, Lane Hudson. So the reason why Hudson isn't in the A tier or S tier, and he would be if it was a goals and assist and power play points only league, my worry with Hudson is he just doesn't really get a lot of peripherals. He was under 100 shots last year. His blocks were decent, but he doesn't hit at all. So he's extremely reliant on his power play point production, which we know is elite. He brings a lot of offense to this Montreal Canadiens team. I do think that due to the Canadian team bias, he may be getting overdrafted this season. But 66 points, 60 assists in his rookie year, just an absolute monster season for the rookie of the year last season. I do think he could be in line for a point per game pace this season. The peripherals kind of scare me. Now, if we do see his shot totals go 150, 140, I do think that he could easily be an A-tier defenseman. He's borderline A-tier, a lot to like from Lane Hudson this season. I would just be cautious in terms of where to draft him because he will really only get you assists, power play points, and a couple goals. Moving on, we have Shea Theodore of the Vegas Golden Knights. So Theodore he's been battling injury his entire career. But over the last 2 seasons, he had his best point per game pace, 0.89
2 years ago and 0.85 points per game last season. Now with the news that Alex Pietrangelo is stepping away from hockey, Theodore could be criminally undervalued going into the season because that just opens up more ice time for him to play. He should be playing likely the highest minutes of his entire career. Power play one is an absolute lock, and we can't forget that they did add Mitch Marner to the lineup, a 100-point offensive player, that should only improve their power play. You have to think anyways, will only improve their power play. So there's a lot to like here from Theodore. My only worry is just the injury concern. He's failed to play 70 games over his last 3 seasons, but he should be in line for a very, very strong 2025 season. Moving on, we have Adam Fox of the New York Rangers. Now, Fox is interesting. So I have a couple things I want to talk about with Adam Fox. So historically, he's been a very strong point guarding defenseman, but he just isn't really that good in terms of peripherals. And he is very, very overdrafted in the last 3 years. He has put up 70 points over the last 3 years, excluding last year, but the seasons prior, he's put up at least 70 points. But the peripherals are lacking. He always seems to be like defenseman 2, defenseman 3 off the board. And I've always seemed to avoid Fox. But going into this season, I think, and I said this in the goalies video, if you watch that one, is that I think both Rangers and Nashville players are going to be extremely underdrafted this year, given the regression they had last season. But they added JT Miller, and as I mentioned with Quinn Hughes, he's a very good power play guy. And they got rid of Chris Kreider, who I did think was kind of not helping the team in any sense. But with Adam Fox here, I think he's a borderline 5th or 6th round pick, maybe a little bit later. But I do think he's going to be criminally underdrafted this season. So with Fox, you're looking at 65 plus points, about 150 shots, 130 blocks, and about 30 hits. So pretty good 82 game pace. Need him to stay healthy for a full 82, and hopefully that power play can get back to what they were a few seasons ago. The last defenseman in the B tier is going to be Thomas Harley of the Dallas Stars. So I initially had Heiskanen here, but I do have some concerns with Heiskanen. I think the reason why Harley edges him out is because Harley actually is a pretty elite goal-scoring defenseman, and he's coming off his second 15-plus goal campaign. And I think he turned some heads last season, just like Lane Hudson turned a lot of heads in his rookie season. I think when Thomas Harley came to play for Team Canada with the Shea Theodore, Josh Morrissey, both injured, I think with Harley showing up in Canada, we definitely saw how elite of a defenseman he actually is. So it's an interesting situation in Dallas. They played a power play 1A and power play 1B last year. Now this may be because of the Heiskanen injury. They were trying to just shuffle out their power plays, but they seem to have so much elite offensive talent, with Duchesne putting up a crazy 82 points last season, that they just decided to split their power play. And I mean, obviously it worked because they seem to be one of the NHL's top teams every single year. So Harley should be in line for a pretty strong season. Expect double-digit goals once again, 40 plus assists. He could be in line for some career highs this season. It just all depends on Heiskanen's health and the deployment they have for both defensemen. So moving on to the next defenseman, we have Miro Heiskanen of the Dallas Stars. So with Heiskanen here, he did go down with injury last season. He missed 32 games, but he did come out and say that he is 100% going into this year. So as I mentioned with Harley, it's just kind of the same situation where it's a power play 1A and power play 1B. I think it hurts Heiskanen more because he was that power play 1 quarterback previously, with little to no time spent on power play 2. But now with the power play 1A and B, Harley now moves up to a power play 1 role. So they're going to be splitting about 50-50. My concern with Heiskanen is just he kind of lacks peripherals. But he should be in line this season for another 50-plus point season if he can remain healthy, as well as putting up over 150 shots. We know he plays the minutes, but he's very, very good on the defensive side of the puck. So the Stars may focus more on Heiskanen playing defense with his smooth skating, similar to a guy like Jacob Slavin, and have Harley focus more on the offensive side of the game. Now moving on, we have Mikhail Sergachev of the Utah Mammoth. That is the first... I think that's the first time I've said the Utah Mammoth right now. Yes, it is, because the goalies, I didn't have any in the top 20. So the Utah Mammoth, let me know how you feel about that name. I think it's pretty good. It rolls off the tongue pretty good. But last season for Sergachev, he moved from the Tampa Bay Lightning over to the Utah Mammoth and immediately was put into a power play 1 role on one of the most exciting teams in the league. and they should be very good going into this season. So he put up 53 points in 77 games, added 23 power play points. The peripherals were solid, 132 shots, 140 blocks, and 61 hits. The hit numbers are way down from what we saw in Tampa. So if he can kind of regain that hit volume and become a triple 100 peripheral guy while still putting up 50 points, he could easily become a B tier defenseman. He played a ton of minutes last season, 2507. I think that was because there was injury to Sean Durzi, another very strong number 2 or number 3 defenseman on the Mammoth. But a lot to like from Sergachev this season. I think he's going to be pretty undervalued in fantasy, and you can probably pick him up in the later rounds. Next up, we have Jakob Chychrun of the Washington Capitals. So with Chychrun here, I wanted to put him in the D tier, but it's hard to undermine a 20-goal season from a defenseman. I almost would say Chychrun is like a great value Zach Werenski, where it has extremely strong offensive numbers, but he has had some injury. But the thing with the Capitals is I do think they were a bit overrated last season. Like I was waiting all year for them to fall off, but everyone was riding the OV goal chase and the whole team was playing very, very good. So there is some concern on team regression in itself that may regress Chychrun. He's not a solidified power play 1 quarterback with John Carlson still there and continuing to put up 50-plus point seasons. But I do expect some strong offensive numbers from Chychrun, who had 20 goals last year. The 21 minutes and 4 seconds time on ice is a little bit concerning to me as well. I've said this in previous videos last year. When you're looking to add or looking to draft defensemen, you want guys that play 23 plus minutes if they're not on power play 1, because that means they'll be there on the ice a lot. They're going to contribute to all the peripheral categories. So the minutes are a bit of a concern. The Capitals' offensive numbers going into this year, a bit of a concern as well for me. So for now, I'm going to conservatively put him in the C tier. Moving on, we have Charlie McAvoy of the Boston Bruins. So McAvoy was arguably one of my highest conviction defensemen going into last season, just because you can get him at a good value as a power play 1 defenseman. He was like defenseman 19 off the board last season, and he was the guaranteed power play 1 quarterback on what I thought was a good Boston team. I don't know how I feel about the Bruins this year. I think they're going to still be a bubble playoff team. They always seem to be good. So with McAvoy here, he did go down with injury at the Four Nations, but his pace last year was 37 points, 162 shots, 132 blocks, and 145 hits. So when healthy, he contributes to every category, playing 24 plus minutes per night and still putting up points on that top power play unit. I think it's going to be a decent comeback season for McAvoy. Because of the injury, it just means you can get him at a better value. So he's definitely going to be a guy I want to be drafted in fantasy. It's just a matter of how good you think the Bruins will be going into this season. Next up, we have Brandon Montour. Nope, not there, Brandon. He wanted to go in the D tier. We have Brandon Montour of the Seattle Kraken. So there's a little bit of concern with Montour, but he still had very good numbers. So my biggest concern is that Vince Dunn is there. They seem to be doing a power play 1A and power play 1B. Seattle's offense does not excite me one bit. They don't really have any excited offensive guys. But Montour still managed to put up 18 goals, 41 points, and had 231 shots last season. So very strong offensive numbers. Not as good as what we saw when he was in Florida, but still shooting the puck at a very elite rate, some of the highest amongst all defensemen in the NHL. And he almost cracked the 20-goal mark last season. So I think he's a safe middle to later round defenseman that you can scoop up that should have a decent amount of goals and shot volume. So rounding out the C tier, now, I wanted to include Dougie. You guys might not like this. I wanted to include Dougie on the D tier just because when you draft him, it's a complete gamble because you never know how healthy he's going to be. So he played 20 games 2 years ago, 64 games last year, 82 games 3 years ago. So he was fully healthy 3 years ago and then basically matched that total in the last 2 seasons. So Dougie just always seems to go down with some sort of injury for like 4 to 6 weeks, and it really hurts your fantasy lineups. But when he's healthy, he's a very, very good defenseman on a per game basis because his shot volume is so strong. So he played in 64 games last season, had 40 points, 186 shots. The biggest thing with Dougie is if he plays a full 82, he's a B or A tier defenseman. It's just a matter of if he does play a full 82. And the last 2 seasons tells me he probably won't. But I'm really hoping he does. So with Dougie this year, I'm going to put him in the C tier, but he is arguably a B tier defenseman. So we have our last 3 defensemen on the list here. We have Noah Dobson of the Montreal Canadiens. I wasn't able to snag a picture of him with Montreal, so it's Montreal, even though it shows the New York Islanders. And with Dobson here, his production should go down considerably offensively this season, just because he went from being back-to-back years on the power play one to now having Lane Hudson there in Montreal, who we all know is the guaranteed power play one quarterback on the Montreal Canadiens. Now, if Hudson does get hurt, then Dobson easily becomes a B or A tier defenseman. But because he won't be on power play one, I do expect some regression in terms of points, maybe sitting in the 35 to 40 point range. But he has had 10 plus goals in the last 4 seasons. A very, very strong shot volume defenseman, which again will likely regress due to not being on the top power play unit. And he also has 100 plus blocks over the last 4 years. So good peripheral defenseman, safe floor. It's just a matter of the deployment in Montreal. The next defenseman, second last on the list here, is John Carlson of the Washington Capitals. So he continues to be that strong offensive power play one guy. The blocks regressed quite a bit last season. He's always a guy that seems to be undervalued in fantasy drafts. Back-to-back 50-point seasons for Carlson. My only concern is I personally think there's going to be regression with the Capitals team this year. And he's turning 36, so there may be actually some physical regression from him as well. But Carlson still should always be a solid value defenseman who is more than likely to quarterback that top power play unit. So with Carlson here, I would not say he's C tier, but the minutes should still be there, maybe 23 plus per night. But with Chikara knocking on the door with 20 plus goals last season, I think Carlson's time may be slowly dwindling down. So the last defenseman on this list is Neil Pionk of the Winnipeg Jets. So with Pionk, he's just a very strong all-around defenseman. He hit 100 plus in all peripheral categories last season, 100 plus shots, 100 plus blocks, 100 plus hits, as well as adding a plus 21 rating and adding 39 points and 10 goals. So the offensive numbers are there. He hits all the peripheral categories at a very solid rate. There are times, and it's a potential strategy, it depends, where you can draft a team's number 2 defenseman when they have a number 1 defenseman that gets injured. And it's not really the case with Morrissey, but if Morrissey ever does go down, Pionk is easily the next man up on the list for them. So with Pionk here, I think he's a safe defenseman a little bit later in drafts because of the peripheral coverage. But I would just caution slightly. But for me, I have him as my rank 25 defenseman. These are all subject to change. Now, the honorable mention defenseman, and I want to talk about it just a little bit, you're probably going to hear him in some videos this season, is actually Noah Hanifin of the Vegas Golden Knights. He was my last cut on the list, so defenseman number 26. I actually initially had him there, but I added Roman Josi back. But with Hanifin as the honorable mention for me, it's the same thing with the Theodore situation, is Theodore always gets injured. They don't have Pietrangelo anymore. So at some point, they're going to have to rely on Noah Hanifin to quarterback that top power play unit, play those workhorse minutes. He should be a massive sleeper defenseman, so make sure you write that down. Now, let me know in the comment section below what you think about these tiers. Who did I miss? Who did I get wrong? Who did I miss tier? I feel like a lot of people are going to have Lane Hudson in that A tier, but it's just a lack of peripherals for me. I'm very curious to what everyone thinks. This is going to change as we find out more news within the preseason, as we begin to continue to update our projections. But definitely leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I'm always open to discussion. I love talking to the commentators. That will do it for the top 25 defenseman tiering list. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.